Have you heard? The world is on fire. The planet is dying. The frogs are turning gay. I mean, frog species are dying at alarming rates.
The future of humanity is at stake.
If we don't urgently change our ways of life, we jeopardize life itself.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
Ecosystems are collapsing worldwide.
Collapse? System collapse? Civilization collapse?
I think that the old system will collapse.
Entire ecosystems are collapsing.
Worldwide eco-genocide.
We're committing ecocide.
And beyond catastrophic.
Climate catastrophe.
We're already taking far more than can be replaced. Climate change, deforestation, soil depletion, perpetual war, the mass extinction of species. It's got so bad that we're now threatening the foundations of all of life itself.
If we are to survive on this planet, the only home any of us will ever know, for our climate, for our security, for our future, we need nature. Now, more than ever. Nature doesn't need people. People need nature.
Whoa, heavy stuff. I didn't realize this was going to be doomer content. But seriously, it's clear. In order to stave off the upcoming apocalypse, we must build a better world.
I don't think that I'm unique in wanting to make the world a better place.
Making the world a better place.
To make the world a better place, do good, make a difference.
I've made the world a better place.
People who want to make a better world.
And I hope that I can make a better world for my daughter.
You've made this world a better place.
But we will use these tools one day to bring about a better world.
And collectively imagining a better world.
We can create a better world.
For making the world a better place.
Is it just fundamentally hard to give away money effectively to make the world better?
Peter Singer is a moral philosopher and utilitarian ethicist who is best known for writing the vegan tome Animal Liberation in 1975. Ingrid Newkirk, founder of PETA, called Singer's work a philosophical bombshell. It forever changed the conversation about our treatment of animals. Wow, he is the ultimate animal lover.
No, sorry, that's not correct. I'm not an animal lover. I do not describe myself as an animal lover. I have no companion animals, and I'm not particularly interested in having companion animals.
Damn, okay. Sorry, my bad. Utilitarianism is all about maximizing happiness by using thought experiments, the most famous being the trolley problem.
Michael, what did you do? I made the trolley problem real so we could see how the ethics would actually play out. There are 5 workers on this track and 1 over there. Here are the levers to switch the tracks. Make a choice.
If you ascribe to a purely utilitarian worldview,
it's just a simulation. I would never make you kill real people. They're fake people, but their pain is real. Does that make sense? There have to be stakes, or it's just another thought experiment.
This is awful.
In true utilitarian form, Singer argues in favor of maximizing happiness. His most influential thought experiment, like the trolley problem, has to do with saving lives. In this experiment, he juxtaposes the idea of saving the life of a drowning child at the expense of soiling your fancy clothes by jumping into a pond.
Imagine that you're walking past a shallow pond, and as you walk past it, you notice that there's a small child who's fallen into the pond and seems to be in danger of drowning. You realize that unless you wade into this pond and pull the child out, the child is likely to drown. There's no danger to you because you know the pond is just a shallow one, but you are wearing a nice pair of shoes and they're probably going to get ruined if you wade into that shallow pond. So, of course, when I ask people this, they always say, well, of course, forget about the shoes. You've just got to save the child. That's clear. And then I stop and say, okay, well, I agree with you about that. But for the price of a pair of shoes, if you were to give that to Oxfam or UNICEF or one of those organizations, they could probably save the life of a child, maybe more than one child, in a poor country where children are dying because they can't get basic medical care to treat very basic diseases like diarrhea or whatever else it might be.
For about 70 cents, you can buy a can of soda, regular or diet. In Ethiopia, for just 70 cents a day, you can feed a child like Jamal nourishing meals.
It takes so little for you to become a special friend to a child in a developing country, but boy, the good it can do is worth more than you can imagine.
With a little of your spare change, you can start to change the life of a child forever.
Not only will I make the world a better place, but doing good is easy because it's so cheap and it feels good.
It's amazingly cheap to help people sometimes, right? There are people with enormous need and I can alleviate it because I happen to be lucky enough to be pretty stably well off. And that's kind of thrilling, right? Like, because your dollars go so much farther abroad, you're being invited to do an enormous amount of good. And that's exciting. Like, it's not just like this grim obligation, it's exciting.
I have no heating and I'm fine, totally fine.
This is Matthew Ricard, Parisian academic turned Buddhist monk who authored the book Altruism, The Power of Compassion to Change Yourself and the World. He's a supporter of a growing social movement called effective altruism.
The term altruism was coined in the 19th century, but the concept of charity has been around as long as human societies have existed, usually in conjunction with spirituality and/or religious practice. Influencers like Singer have taken this concept and added their own utilitarian spin, creating a movement dubbed effective altruism.
Each of us spends money on things that we do not really need, whether it's a new car, a vacation. You could take the money you're spending on those unnecessary things and give it to this organization, which would take the money you had given and use it to buy nets to protect children. And they reduce the number of children dying from malaria. More and more people are understanding this idea, and the result is a growing movement, effective altruism.
So let me get this straight. In order for effective altruism to work, that means we all have to be as effectively altruistic as we can. Is this like a running tally I need to keep in my head? Am I supposed to keep a spreadsheet? Do I have to file an altruism score on my taxes? Who's keeping track of all this?
We calculate the total value of your life. Every single thing you did had an effect that rippled out over time and ultimately created some amount of good or bad.
So donating money is easy and feels good, but how am I supposed to know what charity is the most effective? I'm not the expert.
The decision to donate is easy.
I don't think that I'm unique in wanting to make the world a better place.
Deciding where your donation will help people most? Not so much.
If I give to the wrong charity, that means I didn't give to many charities that could have been better.
And that's where GiveWell comes in.
GiveWell was founded
by a couple of guys who were working for a hedge fund, making a lot of money, decided that they wanted to give some of it away, but didn't know who to give it to, contacted some charities and said, tell us what you would do if we gave you a significant sum of money, and found that what they got back was unsatisfactory. Glossy brochures with photos of smiling kids, but not very much hard data.
GiveWell now gives donors like that the ability to put those good intentions to work. They try as much as possible to put numbers to the effectiveness of their giving efforts.
GiveWell helps take that image of a better world that I have in my head and make it a reality.
So then where is the cutoff? How much money do I have to spend in order to effectively do good in the world? What if I make it my life's work to become a social worker or a doctor or some other thing that saves people's lives?
One person who's thought quite a bit about this issue is Will Crouch, and he set up a website to advise people on how to have the best, most effective career. But you might be surprised to know that one of the careers that he encourages people to consider is to go into banking or finance. Why? Because if you earn a lot of money, you can give away a lot of money. And in fact, there's one particular nerd who has been a particularly effective altruist because he got this. This is the website of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And if you look at the words on the top right-hand side, it says, all lives have equal value.
The sheer entitled caucasity to say all lives matter, I'm gonna stab you.
The rational understanding of our situation in the world that has led to these people being the most effective altruists in history, Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett.
By utilitarian logic, Peter Singer's thought experiment concludes that earning as much money as possible is good, actually. It's not about how the capitalist billionaire earned his money, it's what he does with it afterwards. What we need is more moral billionaires.
The world we're living in today is one in which it is possible to become a billionaire, and there are many people who have become billionaires, and some of them, many of them if you like, most of them I'll accept, are immoral because they are not thinking hard about how to give away their wealth most effectively.
Philanthropy is not the right thing. We need serious political change to change the system.
Now perhaps you say, well, philanthropy is not the right thing, we need serious political change to change this system. You are saying that Tom Steyer and his wife, Kat Taylor, are immoral. They are the largest donors to the Democratic Party politics in the United States. They supported both Barack Obama's campaigns very heavily. They supported Hillary Clinton's campaigns. They have been particularly concerned about climate change, and they have set up a non-profit organization to try to make sure that climate change is a more prominent issue. And I'm happy, I have to say, that people like Gates and Buffett and Carrie Tuna and Dustin Moskovitz, that they actually have money that they can put to really good causes.
In Singer's world, goodness is about optimization. As long as we individually optimize our decisions and how much money we make, we can do it. We can make the world a better place. I'm gonna make as much money as I can so that I can donate it to charity. This plan is bulletproof. I can't imagine a scenario where Singer's pond experiment with effective altruist parameters has a bad outcome.
So let me ask you what an effective altruist would say about this. So if I'm walking through the park and I see that child drowning, but I'm running late to give a speech, and I am going to get paid $1 million for that speech, and I've already declared that I'm going to give that $1 million to the Against Malaria Foundation. But if I don't get there in time, I won't get that opportunity. What should I do?
Of course, an effective altruist is going to have to say, you ought to give the speech and get the $1 million because, as I just said, that can save a large number of lives. If you really imagine it as a hypothetical situation that you could do that and those would be the consequences, I'm going to have to say, don't let the $1 million go if this is the only chance you have to get it and to donate it to effective charities. That actually is better than rescuing the child.
Yeah.
All Singer has done is create moral justification for doing whatever it takes to make as much money as possible, as long as you donate it to a good charity after you earn it. It's no wonder all these people like him. But that's not even the most sinister part of Singer's effective altruism. Do we forego expensive life-saving surgeries for some people because for the same amount, we could treat a greater number of people? Do we skip Mima's life-saving open heart surgery because for the same price, we could give 200 school children dental cleanings? Also, isn't this already what insurance companies do? Using effective altruist logic, we can very quickly start to go down a rabbit hole of placing values on different people's lives based solely on their need for material resources. It's no wonder Singer has been attacked for most of his career as an ableist, and why his rationale can be applied in the most nefarious circumstances.
Let me give you a hypothetical. To maximize the greatest level of happiness and minimize the least amount of suffering on our planet Earth, it has to exterminate the human race. Then are we to... Yeah, if we got those calculations right, if we're assuming that was in fact the best thing in the long run for everyone. Well, just like you say in effective altruism that let's say $1 spent in Asia or in Africa is a lot better spent because it goes a lot further away than $1 spent, let's say, in Canada or in the United States, they would say, well, if we put all those effort in all those other species, as opposed to the humans, the planet would be much better off because look, they've run the planet
for the last, let's say, a few thousand years, and it's pretty much a disaster. Species extinction,
mass extinction,
environmental collapse,
ecosystems are collapsing.
Oceans are acidification, pollution with plastic materials, climate change, you name it. So they haven't done very good job, and it's just not worthy. Let's say effective altruism from the planetary point of view would mean that just like you favor investing in the third world rather than, let's say, the people who need it in Canada and in the US, they say likewise, only with other species against humanity.
Not that easy to believe that would be the case, but if it is, then okay. I mean, if they've got the calculations right, and that is the better outcome. As I said, I'm not wedded to the existence of any particular species.
So would you resist any such sort of solution? And would it be ethically wrong to resist?
I think it probably would be ethically wrong to resist it, yes. I think if, in fact, this superintelligence correctly judged that we humans are the cause of so much suffering in the world and so much wrongdoing and need to be exterminated, I think it would be a mistake to say, well, I'm human, so somehow I have to defend all human beings.
So we just walk to the slaughter voluntarily?
If, in fact, that is the correct solution to all the problems, yes. And yes, we ought to get rid of ourselves. We ought to take the drugs so that we just gently slip into death and wipe ourselves out, and then I think we should do that.
I've been vegan now for a little over 2 years.
Just being good and applying that goodness, or altruism, as effectively as possible sends us down a utilitarian thought experiment nightmare that ends with justifying the slaughter of innocent people on some arbitrary min-max metrics. But what if instead we commit ourselves to not just being good after we make our money, but making sure our work itself is good and pure and altruistic? Surely this would create a better world. We need to do the work. The good work.
All that matters is that I just try to do as much good work as I can do.
We're going to talk about a little bit about that. We're going to talk about what the Good Work Institute does, trying to create a space where change makers, nonprofits, creative folks can do good work in the world and then do something beneficial with their profits.
Okay.
Something a little different maybe. I've been reading about Jeff Bezos. I don't know what he's doing to change things with his...
There's no doubt that it has to change, right? Because it's completely unsustainable and it's killing us. We're committing ecocide.
Ecosystems are collapsing.
This is broken, and I think we are at that crisis moment. So I believe that we need to use the money that we have now in service to the transition, right? And that's like nonprofits now, they need that money.
Yeah.
Because you still got to pay rent in this system, right? But the goal should not be to sustain ourselves in this system. The goal should be to transcend this system and move to one that actually works for people on the planet, right? So, my name is Matthew Stinchcomb.
Matt Stinchcomb, a true Brooklyn hipster, graduate of Oberlin College, a private liberal arts school, and member of a semi-successful indie band called The French Kicks, like any well-pedigreed kid, lucked his way into high places. He just so happened to be friends with the people who founded the publicly traded, pioneering gig work platform, Etsy, and despite a complete lack of qualifications, became the first non-founding employee and eventually VP of Branding and Social Responsibility.
Rob said, well, why don't you come do this with me? And I was like, well, what would I do? I'm not a programmer. He's like, you can be the marketing guy. And I was like, I know nothing about marketing. He's like, you'll be perfect then. This is actually the first piece of marketing that I made for Etsy. And you can tell that I'm not thinking in like a web savvy way. I'm like, let's hand screen print posters and put them up around town. But that's what we did. And I also love this poster because I think it captures the essence of Etsy and the way we were thinking about business even at the very beginning. So if you can see it, that's a kid throwing a rock at a factory, and it says en masse production. And we thought that there was a political element to Etsy. The self-sufficiency with doing it yourself, the ability to not have to buy into a system that we knew was actually corrupt and felt wrong to us.
From the beginning, Etsy has tried to position itself as an alternative to the corrupt system, but it's incredibly easy to find Etsy vendors who will tell you this is nothing more than a PR term, that Etsy is very much a part of the corrupt system it purports to oppose. In a 2012 article for Wired magazine, one Etsy vendor says, "I miss the spirit of the handmade movement." You know Etsy, as opposed to those big multi-million-dollar companies that exploit their staff, pollute the environment, and disrespect their own customers, all for the sake of making even more money. Guess what? Etsy became one of those. Talk about a radical change for the worse.
You know, one thing that we've also done really from the beginning has been very transparent with our community.
The part where I felt really defeated with Etsy is there's really nothing I could do. They were just going to do whatever they want to do.
We really do think that our community are our partners in this.
But as you're selling on Etsy's website, you are not selling on your website. You are not selling your items.
We are nothing without the Etsy sellers.
They are the landlord and they control your world.
You know, I really think of them as our partners in this, right? Whatever they decide to make is what's sold on Etsy. We don't sell anything ourselves.
Etsy's working hard to try to sell your products, which are their products.
Etsy was at the forefront of a new economy, one that is ruled and run by Silicon Valley, intensifies precarious gig working, and contains multitudes of decentralized micro markets. On top of all this, the most pernicious aspect might be how they created a self-policing panopticon for their ever-growing army of precarious workers. The front line of enforcement is the community itself, users who flag a given shop for insufficiently handmade behavior. But if the shop's practices are deemed to be in the spirit of Etsy, the sellers can work with the Marketplace Integrity and Trust and Safety Department that helps shopkeepers preserve the spirit of Etsy as they grow.
So we changed the mission of Etsy. We had some really long version of it, which was Etsy is the marketplace we make together. We enable people anywhere to easily build and directly exchange with independent creative businesses. We envision a new economy where self-sufficiency, well-being, and durability are the key measures of success. Now, like, I wrote that, and I made it super wonky, and so the mission became reimagine commerce in ways that build a lasting and fulfilling world.
The contradictions between Etsy's mission and how it operated, as any normal mega corporation would under a capitalist system, started to catch up with Stinchcomb. In a 2017 New York Times article, Stinchcomb says, "Etsy had the potential to be one of the truly great ones, but it looks like they are cutting anything that's not essential to the business. This is the cautionary tale of capitalism. There's only so much wiggle room as a public company. If you really want to build a company that works for people and the planet, capitalism isn't the solution."
And, you know, I had this kind of underlying fear or concern that I was just perpetuating a less bad version of something that was fundamentally broken. Not that business is broken, but really that our economic system is broken. And originally, Etsy.org was set up to basically try to solve the problem of, you know, if business as usual is destroying the world, right? We need business as unusual. Like, what does a totally different way of doing business look like? What we're really doing is trying to help people be humans, and then allowing to express their humanity through business. And so Etsy.org really started out as a business school.
Earlier this year, Etsy launched a business education program for business people who want to make a better world.
And when I met Matt, he was giving the E.F. Schumacher lecture at Judson. And I thought everything he said sounded so Christian. Unlearning capitalism, unlearning the negative parts. So capitalism may be a fine system, but it's gotten way too big for its britches and it's hurting people. It is, we call it spiritual entrepreneurship.
Business is not the problem. Business is good, as long as you do it in a spiritual way. The missing component with Etsy was a lack of spirituality.
And the more I learned about business as it was conventionally practiced, the less I really wanted to do it that way. You know, I found that it was at odds in a lot of ways with a lot of my values. At the same time, I got really interested in my own spiritual development and reading a lot of Buddhist thinkers. So that led me on my own 10-year journey with Etsy to figure out the ways that I could maximize the social, ecological, and economic impact that I have in the world. And ultimately it became the mission of Etsy.com. And the shift that was needed was much deeper than just like shipping with less carbon emissions. You know, it's that consciousness shift. And the consciousness shift in my mind is really one of reconnecting to ourselves, to our hearts, reconnecting to our neighbors, to everyone in our community, and reconnecting to the earth, reconnecting to our place, because I think it's disconnection that is the root of these problems that allow us to do the things that we do. When you think about the incredible challenges that we're facing right now, climate change, wealth inequality, resource scarcity, plastic islands in the sea, tar sands, fracking, loss of indigenous culture, waste, these things are all connected. And I hate to say it, we're all complicit in these things. We're all part of this. And, you know, as much as I want to just blame ExxonMobil and Monsanto and all of these companies, it's the choices that we make as consumers that also perpetuate the system and create a lot of these problems. Schumacher, just since we're here, I'll quote him one more time. See, everything's in Schumacher. You can find the answers to business are in Schumacher or Buddhism. So he wrote, "An attitude to life which seeks fulfillment in the single-minded pursuit of wealth, in short, materialism, does not fit into this world because it contains within itself no limiting principle, while the environment in which it is placed is strictly limited."
It doesn't take a genius to know that we can't have infinite growth on a finite planet.
I think this was a very pivotal moment because it marks the shift when we were just publicly saying, oh, it's your place to buy and sell all things handmade. And we started thinking, actually, no, it's this platform for building a new economy. And so this was an economics conference that we put on. Decades of an unyielding focus on economic growth, above all, has left us ever disconnected with nature, our communities, and the people and processes behind the objects in our lives. You know, there's little doubt that a lot of giant corporations, especially with their outsized influence in politics, which I think is just so awful for so many reasons, they really drive so much of what is troubling in the world.
So is business bad or what?
Business is just a tool, and it's all about how you use it.
How did you use it, Matt? Aren't you just another capitalist pig?
Etsy had, made $900 million last year, those capitalist pigs.
To be fair, once he saw that the company was causing harm, he branched out to do something more noble.
But as we started to have real impact in people's lives, the mission of the company evolved a lot. So this is where we are today. Reimagine commerce in ways that build a more fulfilling and lasting world. And lasting is really specifically, I think, an ecological message. There's no economy without ecology.
Okay. He wants to make the world a better place, and he wants to use business as a tool for that, despite his history of not using business as a tool for that. Sounds plausible, right? This is valiant, no? It's definitely not just another way for rich people to feel good about themselves, right?
So anyways, I'm very driven by this personal mission. I've made it first. That's a Freudian slip. This is the company's mission, but I guess it's actually also kind of a personal mission.
If you're waking up and wondering why you don't feel so good, that's because you're living in a capitalist world and you're an animal.
To truly reimagine commerce is going to require a shift in consciousness. We have to fundamentally reimagine our whole belief systems and value systems, and come up with new definitions of what success is, of what return is, and not just in terms of financial forms of capital, but also natural capital, spiritual capital. We know that if we're just optimizing for the maximum capital return, that's not sustainable. Our world will collapse if we continue to do that. It'll take the end of capitalism on some level to build the world that we want to build. So then, what exactly is the problem with capitalism?
Capitalism. What is the deep logic that makes capitalism tick? The purpose of capitalism is to grow more capital. Politicians have a cuddly-sounding euphemism for this. They just call it growth.
When they say growth, what they mean is gross domestic product, or GDP for short. GDP is the total market value of all goods and services produced within a country's borders. Basically, it's shorthand for the economy and how healthy it is. Capitalism has indeed been responsible for substantial GDP growth, raising per capita income and with it, standards of living for many parts of the globe. The hope brought about by these newly raised living standards can probably be best distilled as the American dream, an ethos in which freedom includes the opportunity for prosperity and success. But some might argue that the American dream is a lie, and that it's the foundational lie of capitalism itself.
But there's also another huge foundational lie, which could be called the foundational lie of capitalism. And this is the idea that everyone can justifiably aspire to private luxury. That however poor you might be now, however excluded, however marginalized, you have a chance under capitalism of becoming extremely rich and owning a huge amount of natural wealth. But it's that promise that you too could be like those people you see on TV. You too could be like the Kardashians. You too could be like the Koch brothers. You too could be like Donald Trump. You can have a great big gold tower with your name emblazoned on it. You can have a private jet. You can have a huge ranch, a great big country estate. That's the promise on which the whole thing is based.
So it's not just prosperity and success. Literally every single person living in capitalism wants to be a Kardashian. How greedy and selfish. Don't they realize they're killing the planet?
People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, nature is angry.
Damn, nature sounds pissed. How bad is it really, though?
68% of plants and animals have been wiped out over the past 50 years. I mean, effectively, our economy is effectively a death cult. It's wiping out huge portions of the non-human world, and the extinction rate now is up to 1,000 times faster than prior to the Industrial Revolution. So we refer to this as the Anthropocene, right? The Anthropocene meaning the first era in which humans have had a decisive impact on geological processes and are shaping the planet. Any successful attempts to avert societal collapse will require what in ecological economics we refer to as degrowth strategies.
Okay, but what the hell is degrowth exactly? Is there like a set script, a specific policy proposal or something?
Well, there's no set script for degrowth. Degrowth is urban gardens, open source software, and community credit unions. It's cooperatives for childcare and healthcare, emphasizing voluntary work to meet local needs. Degrowth, above all, is a cultural shift.
And so the whole field of degrowth scholarship is organized around thinking about what that looks like. And at this point, there's robust proposals for what a degrowth economy could look like that, in fact, that we argue could deliver even higher levels of human well-being than people presently enjoy.
So degrowth is any number of things or combination of things, but it's also very robust and good. Why is this starting to sound like it's just a blanket term that's trying to be everything to everyone? Where did degrowth even come from in the first place?
The program was originally devised by a scientist working from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Jay Forrester. It was developed under the auspices of the Club of Rome by an MIT research team to present a complex model of the world and what we humans are doing to it.
The most important lesson is that we're near the end of our development of society, which has been going on for about 2,000 years. That we've reached levels of prosperity which carry the seeds of disruption and necessitate a complete re-look at the whole world's social, political, and other situations.
At the heart of the degrowth movement is a conversation about energy. Degrowth advocates are usually in favor of a transition to renewable energy, but say that this transition cannot happen fast enough. Their assertion is that citizen consumers must consume less. They argue that in rich nations like the United States, we can afford to get by on less.
The idea that you can have green growth, but you can decouple that from the consumption of energy and therefore from CO2 emission is very problematic.
The point is clear, and that is that, if we continue growing the energy system while shifting over to renewables, not only does that make the task of making the transition much more difficult, but also is going to involve an ever-increasing amount of materials that will have to be extracted in order to produce these solar panels and wind turbines.
Of course, they realize the optics of telling poor countries to consume less is heinous. Degrowth influencers will insist that they only want degrowth in the global north, rather than the global south.
The crucial thing here is to recognize that there's a distinction between rich countries and poor nations and poor countries when it comes to the question of degrowth. So most advocates of degrowth don't call for degrowth in the global south or in poorer nations, recognizing that in some nations, an increase in aggregate GDP even might be necessary in order to generate the resources required for investing in healthcare and education and so on. That's disputable by some people.
That's disputable by some people?
But what we do know for sure is that degrowth has to happen in rich nations.
Right now, we're consuming about 100 billion tons a year, so way over the sustainable threshold. All of that, and I emphasize all of that, is due to excess consumption in high-income nations, right? If we were all to consume like the average person in the rest of the world, then there would be no ecological overshoot.
A major criticism of degrowth is that it's indistinguishable from austerity. Degrowthers counter this indirectly by hinging their ideology on one specific success metric, replacing GDP, a traditional indicator of prosperity, with happiness.
And at the end, what gives you happiness is not those, buying things.
We have high level of income, we have another car, we have a third house. Within a couple of months, we get used to that. So our initial increase in happiness is actually lost and drops back to normal. Well, this does not mean that income and material standards and material needs are not important for happiness. Of course, they're key for happiness. Once we cover our basic needs, all type of income increases afterwards just don't contribute to our satisfaction of life.
The Greater Good Science Center basically figured out the 4 things that make us well. And I think they're up to 6 now, but the 4 primary drivers of well-being are a sense of purpose, belonging, so community, right, makes sense, wonder and awe of the natural world, so our connection to nature, and giving.
Being of service.
Yeah, and it's so simple.
It's amazingly cheap to help people sometimes. And that's exciting. It's not just this grim obligation, it's exciting.
Obviously, having no money is awful and stressful and a real
bummer, man.
But once your needs are met and you're out of that place of scarcity or fear, actually any incremental increase in wealth actually makes you less happy.
Yeah.
And so it's really not money that makes us happy. It's all of those other things that, chasing after endless growth or whatever it may be diminishes.
This is absurd. They're delusional rich people skipping over the whole point, which is that the problem is unequal distribution of wealth. Why don't they just call it redistribution instead of degrowth?
Now, even if capitalism were distributive, even if it did ensure that everybody got a chance, got a look in, that promise would still be impossible to fulfill simply because there isn't enough place in which it could be fulfilled.
Why is this starting to sound like a scarcity argument?
You can't all have a ranch or a giant estate or a tower in your own name. You can't all have a private jet and a runway to land it on because there simply is not enough land. And of course, there's not enough ecological space either. If everybody lived like the very rich, we would cook the planet in a matter of years. There just isn't enough space for everybody to live like that. It just doesn't exist. That space is an illusion. And of course, alongside that illusion comes an even bigger illusion that we can all just continue to grow, that the economy can grow and grow and grow infinitely in a finite planet.
It doesn't take a genius to know that we can't have infinite growth on a finite planet.
And the shift that was needed was much deeper than just shipping with less carbon emissions. It's that consciousness shift of reconnecting to ourselves, to our hearts. We also, in that program, were working with a lot of material like The Limits to Growth by Donella Meadows and Buddhist Economics by E.F. Schumacher. And everything was really talking about, like the Schumacher book, Small is Beautiful, right?
Degrowth is ultimately just a way for rich people to deal with the fact that more money is not making them happy. It's a way for them to deal with their guilt and make them well. It's their religion. It makes them feel like a good person. A pernicious aspect of all this is how children are being leveraged and manipulated. They act as doomsday spokespeople for the rich. It's striking to hear young children take such pessimistic, antinatalist stances. But it's striking by design. Calling it a cult sounds like hyperbole, but
a crucial part of what's happening right now is that the youth are rising up. It's terrible that it has to be this way. It's terrible that our children feel the need to go out of school and miss some of their learning, to try to stand up to say, look, we want a future, save our world.
There are a lot of people already now, like even myself at 16, thinking about whether or not it's even ethical to have children at this time.
Did you have to worry of these things when you were my age?
How dare you! You have stolen my dreams and my childhood.
I want to have the chance to live.
My fellow citizens, it is with a heavy heart that I bring you the findings of the Council. Childbearing is herewith forbidden. The abduction of a child shall be the gravest of crimes, punishable by death.
the anti-natalism and pessimism present in today's environmental movement has a direct through line from the late 60s, early 70s. In 1968, a biologist named Paul Ehrlich co-authored, with his wife Anne, a book called The Population Bomb. The book, along with Ehrlich's late-night television appearances, catapulted the Malthusian topic of overpopulation back into the public zeitgeist. The success of Ehrlich's book resulted in the formation of a non-profit activist group called ZPG, Zero Population Growth.
We are starting in now. This is the first step. The Bagleys belong to a growing number of young marrieds who favor ZPG, Zero Population Growth.
How many children do you have?
2. I have 2 children.
Ehrlich's views on how to bring the birth rate down were concrete. Compulsion if voluntary methods fail. Creating a blacklist of people, companies, and organizations impeding population control in the U.S. Responsibility prizes for childless marriages. A tax on children. And a luxury tax on diapers and cribs.
The concerns about population became misanthropic. And it was taken with so much seriousness that Paul Ehrlich could recommend things like putting stuff in public water that would make people not as fertile.
The book, authored and published at the behest of the Sierra Club, landed Ehrlich on multiple late-night shows where he openly campaigned for the government to propagandize people about overpopulation.
What can the government, what ought the government to do about this?
Well, what it ought to do is this. The first thing, you don't want to put, I'm against government interference in our lives. You want to minimize that. So the very first thing the government should do is try and take the pressure off to reproduce. There's a lot of pressure in our society now to reproduce. If you're single, people try and push you into getting married. Young couples, if they don't have children, people say, gee, they must be sterile. They never say, gee, maybe they like good wine and going to the theater and so on. They prefer that to scraping diapers. So there's pressure to have children. So the first thing that should happen is that the president ought to say, from now, here on out, no intelligent, patriotic American family ought to have more than 2 children, preferably 1, if you're starting a family now. Not any law, but just say this is what responsible people do. He ought to make the FCC see to it that large families are always treated in a negative light on television wherever they appear. There ought to be a tremendous amount of television time devoted to spot commercials, the sort we've had against smoking. But the ones in the middle, say in the middle of Beverly Hillbillies, you get a scene which shows Los Angeles in the smog, and it just says this city has a fatal disease. It's called overpopulation, and so long. Now that sort of campaign, you could have a census, a sample census, which would see whether that was having the desired effect. If that didn't, you could move to giving women bonuses for not having babies. That almost certainly would do the job. If that didn't have the effect, then you could move to changing the tax structure so that people who had the money and had the children paid for the children. In other words, you would increase taxes on people with children rather than decrease them, since when they have the children, they require more services. If that doesn't work, then you'll have the government legislating the size of the family. And people say, oh, that's impossible. Government can never intrude and tell you how many children to have. Well, I got news. You know, it intruded a long time ago and told you how many wives you can have. And there's not the slightest question that if we don't get the population under control with voluntary means, that in the not too distant future, the government will simply tell you how many children you can have and throw you in jail if you have too many.
None of the predictions predictions in the population bomb turned out to be correct, but that wasn't the point of the book anyways.
But overall, the book did what Ian Ballantyne and Dave Brower of the Sierra Club were the two people who asked us to do it, did what we hoped it would do, and that is it brought the population issue into the environmental movement when it was more or less starting up.
Despite being totally wrong in his prediction and coming across as an insane person in retrospect, Ehrlich is still around, listened to, and even respected for his opinions within civil society.
Back in the early 70s, and even a little before, when the idea of slowing population growth in the United States was a topic of discussion, there was a movement to change advertising, for example, to feature household goods being used by families with no more than 2 children. And that, in fact, worked very successfully. There were also some interesting ad campaigns at Planned Parenthood, like showing a man obviously pregnant and saying, how many would he want? Things like that. So it can be done that way, through publicity and general propaganda. And this, of course, had nothing to do with the government. It was not part of it at all. It was done through private organizations and NGOs such as Planned Parenthood. But there's a lot that can be done that way, and you really do influence public opinion when you do that.
I am not pessimistic because of what we can't do. I'm pessimistic about what we won't do and what we're not doing.
That I'm pessimistic about what people are doing to each other, doing to this wonderful planet.
But remember, I'm a notorious pessimist.
Interesting. There seems to be some overlap here. I wonder what Ehrlich thinks about degrowth.
We're truly hooked on growth. You can't get along without talking about 3 or 4% growth, which basically means you can't do arithmetic. There is no way do the numbers yourself. See where you are in 150 years. If you have 4% growth, you're going to be roughly 100 times as rich. What does 100 times as rich mean for people in this room? I mean, everybody's going to have 15 or 20 cars, several airplanes.
You can't all have a private jet.
No way. If you do look at the numbers on the present population, as you know, even with 2 or 3 billion people living in misery, we'd need another half a planet just to maintain 7 billion people at that level of misery. And they're planning on 9.5 billion people and everybody living like Americans and Aussies. Ain't gonna work.
It is so much simpler to convert the world, to gradually reduce the population, to change our patterns of consumption, and particularly to totally re-engineer.
Ehrlich spoke candidly about propagandizing the public, but he's also been a vocal advocate for another way to subvert democratic populist sentiment.
But educational processes are so slow. Can we reach people soon enough?
We've got to use political processes. I don't think you don't have to educate everyone in the United States. Only Mr. Nixon and Mr. Agnew can listen to the silent and understand what they're saying. What you need is to get about 10 million people really concerned with taking action to solve these problems and work through the political system, and you'll be able to get the job done. You don't need everybody. You need a concerned activist group that's willing to do something. Most people in the United States don't pay any attention to politics or what's going on, and you don't need them.
That's where it gets really exciting to me, because all of a sudden, well, that could be a powerful political voice. That could be a powerful voice for action. That could be a powerful voice for protest.
This type of moral minoritarianism has been codified by the nonprofit activist group Extinction Rebellion. Citizens' assemblies are a key tactic of their organizational structure.
So, a citizens' assembly is essentially populating a decision-making assembly, maybe 100 people or so, by selecting people at random from the population. Extinction Rebellion went to see Annalise Dodds a couple of weeks ago, and we said, please, can you oppose the expressway? And she said, I can't oppose it, because if I do, then the chances of me being able to push for affordable housing along that road will be severely reduced. And I was elected on the basis that I would get as much affordable housing as possible in Oxford. Now, whether you agree with her analysis about whether it tied her hands on that or not, it doesn't really matter. But the point is that they have all of these things pulling them in all these different directions, all this party politics.
I think she means a constituency.
Whereas citizens' assemblies just kind of bypass all of that.
The success of Extinction Rebellion, again, relies on finding a small group of extreme people to push their agendas.
Climate change is really bad, but you can't tell people, you can't terrify them, you can't do what we just did on stage. If you were trying to motivate everybody, that's a very, very important point. But what about if you're not trying to motivate every single person? So we've got people over here who really don't care. And then we've got people over here, committed environmental activists, who are changing their behaviour, actively changing their behaviour. And then you've got lots of people in the middle who think it's good to look after the environment, but are not actually changing their behaviour very much, or to sort of different degrees. So the idea is that if you tell them and basically scare the shit out of them, then this will happen. And they'll just go, oh my God, this is too much. And they'll feel too small, they'll feel too scared, they'll run away. What about if that isn't actually the case for everybody? What about if, when you tell the truth, this happens? You get a small bunch of people who go, oh my God, this is the most important thing that anybody has ever told me. So these people act differently for whatever reason. They have a different mindset, different values, something's happened in their life, they might have a different religion or spiritual practice, which makes them stand up and say, I'm going to act, I'm going to do something about this. But also, most importantly, you do not need everybody.
You don't need everybody, you need a concerned activist group.
You do not need everybody at all. You don't need 75% of the population, you don't need 50% of the population, you don't need 25%, you don't need 10%, you don't need 5%.
What you need is to get about 10 million people.
3.5% of the population need to rebel in order to change a system.
Sounds like cult recruitment? That's basically because it is.
Don't you want devoted followers who leave their families for you, give their money to you, give their bodies to you, give up their lives for you, consider you God, and will kill for you? Don't you want to become a cult leader? Since the death of God, there's been a vacancy open. You could fill that void. Here's how. Promise to fulfill their dreams.
Join our elite mission to save the world.
Are you trying to recruit me? No. I'm just trying to share something meaningful with you.
We don't want this blood to be ours or theirs. So keep it up, tell the truth, and rebel for life.
Establish front groups.
We're a Bible study group.
We're a management course.
We're a world peace organization.
This is the end game now. We need to sort this out, and right now. Extinction Rebellion.
You can tell them time is running out and that they must make their decision now or it will be too late.
It really isn't an exaggeration to say that the future of the human race is now at stake.
Surround them with happy, true believers, so when in doubt, they will tend to do what everyone around them is doing and believe that is normal. Control their emotions. Induce guilt.
People are dying of starvation.
People are dying of starvation.
People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing.
But don't be stupid about it. Start slowly. A good con man takes a little bit of truth and a lot of lies and pulls the wool over the eyes of the ignorant.
The only time that people know it's serious is when people are prepared to sacrifice their liberty in defense of their beliefs. We are those people.
Induce trance states and self-hypnosis by practicing thought-stopping rituals and repetitive acts like dancing. Isolate them from the rest of the world. Make them feel part of a special elite group with an important mission. Make them feel guilty.
We're doing important work here.
You expect saving the world is easy?
We're all called upon to make some sacrifices for the cause.
We know that we're currently heading to overshoot scenarios, which will almost certainly cause unprecedented levels of human suffering.
David Attenborough had said that our civilization will collapse within 10 years if we don't take urgent action.
That's why we're here. I've got kids.
Broadly speaking, we're a society of altruists governed by psychopaths.
Altruism, huh? I wonder what our friend Peter Singer has to say about all this population stuff.
If, as we now know, we live in a world in which greenhouse gas emissions have impacts on everyone, have harmful impacts on everyone, then if those impacts are serious enough, the right to procreate has to be balanced against them. I think that providing incentives to couples to have small families also does not necessarily violate the right to procreate.
You would increase taxes on people with children.
If you come and get sterilized, we'll provide you with some sort of minimum, monthly amount of cash or something like that.
So, of course, Singer, being the utilitarian ethicist that he is, approaches the idea of overpopulation as if it were a trolley problem, maximizing the outcome using the metric of happiness and well-being as the guiding principle.
What should we think about life for people in the poorer parts of the world?
The global south.
Parts of the world where population is growing fastest. What should we think about the quality of life of those people now? Should we think of it as, perhaps not as positive as ours, but nevertheless positive? Or should we think about it as negative? That's a difficult question. It's not just a factual question. It obviously requires you to decide how you're going to judge whether a life is positive or negative. If we want to look at this and try to get some data on it, we can only do that through asking people questions. We don't have a kind of happiness measuring stick.
Initial increase in happiness is actually lost.
But we can't stick anything into them that tells them whether their lives are happy or unhappy, positive or negative.
The Greater Good Science Center basically figured out the 4 things that make us well.
So can happiness be objectively measured or not? I mean, obviously it can't. But if that's the case, then how do we know if the degrowth model, which replaces GDP with well-being, is doing a good job? Doesn't that undermine the whole thing? The reality is, these people don't let the lack of objectivity get in the way. Which brings us to the repugnant conclusion. The repugnant conclusion is a paradoxical thought experiment identified by utilitarian philosopher Derek Parfit. This scenario starts with 2 hypothetical population models. Population A is very small, but has a very high average of happiness. A plus is identical to A, but with twice the population, and the additional population is not as happy. In this thought experiment, we get to pick a scenario and must decide,
what would be the most ethical decision here?
But how do we make a decision if we can't actually measure happiness? What are the lives of the people who score in a 75 like? Are their lives still worth living?
It's not that they're like second-class citizens who have to clean the homes of the first-class citizens or something like that.
I don't know, man. If they aren't at maximum happiness, maybe their lives aren't worth living.
Yeah, but they're still happy to be alive. They, if you could wipe them out somehow, they wouldn't want you to do that.
Okay, you're right. A plus is better than A. Okay, but there is a third option in this scenario. Population B has the same number of people in A+, with the level of happiness equally distributed over the entire population. If A+ is better than A because there are more people, and B has more happy people than A+, then B must be better than A.
Then it seems pretty clear that if we now compare B and A+, that B is actually better than A+. B has the same number of people as A+, and they're better off. And if inequality was still worrying you, despite the fact that it's sort of a natural inequality you can do nothing about, if inequality was still worrying you, well, there's no inequality in B. I accept that the average level of well-being in the world will be lower if there are more people, but there will be more people, and there will be more people whose lives are still positive, and that in itself is a good thing.
If we keep running this experiment all the way down to Z, we get a massive population that is barely happy. But according to our own repugnant conclusion, we must opt in since it's the best outcome.
What Parfit refers to as the repugnant conclusion, well, Parfit said, okay, then what about the comparison between A and Z? A is the same A we had before, right? 1 billion at a very high level, at 100. Z is a world with a huge population where life is still worth living, still has to be positive, but barely so. Parfit at one point described it as a life of muzak and potatoes.
You can't all have a ranch. There just isn't enough space for everybody to live like that.
That's all you get to hear is muzak that you get in elevators and shopping centres, and all you get to eat are potatoes. Everybody existing on muzak and potatoes would still be better than this world of 1 billion or 10 billion people living fantastically rich and creative lives. That's a little hard to take.
What's funny about this whole experiment is that even though they admit you cannot objectively measure happiness, they use that metric anyways. And the kicker is that they act as though happiness is a finite resource that has to be, or that it even can be, distributed. It can't. Happiness is a stand-in for material resources, for the economy, for GDP. The thing that makes this so repugnant is that it's fixed on this idea that a larger population is the trade-off for happiness. The Malthusian assertion is that there aren't enough resources for everyone to live a good life. But we know this is bullshit. We produce more than enough food and resources for the entire population and then some. And they know it. In a 1955 speech, John Bugass, number 2 at the Ford Motor Company, coined the term consumerism as a substitute for capitalism to better describe the American economy. The term consumerism, he said, would pin the tag where it actually belongs, on Mr. Consumer, the real boss and beneficiary of the American system. It would pull the rug right out from under our unfriendly critics who have blasted away so long and so loud at capitalism. Somehow, I just can't picture them shouting, "Down with the consumers!"
Well, at present, for if we're specifically talking about climate change, I think consumption is a much bigger factor than population. So I think that's where, if we were just focusing on climate change, that's where we would need to take the most action.
It is so much simpler to convert the world, to gradually reduce the population, to change our patterns of consumption.
All of that, and I emphasize all of that, is due to excess consumption in high-income nations.
It's the choices that we make as consumers that also perpetuate the system and create a lot of these problems.
And of course, alongside that illusion comes the even bigger illusion that we can all just continue to grow, that the economy can grow and grow and grow infinitely in a finite planet.
I'm starting to see a narrative become clear.
It doesn't take a genius to know that we can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. If we are going to survive the Anthropocene, it will be because we create post-growth economies that allow us to flourish on this beautiful and generous planet we call home.
We have a choice before us: growth or life. Thank you.
The clip we keep seeing
can't have infinite growth
comes from a case study on a website called therules.org. The Rules was an activist collective that existed from 2012 to 2019. Through narrative and cultural interventions, The Rules worked directly with social movements, journalists, think tanks, independent researchers, and others to reframe and amplify alternatives to help midwife post-capitalist realities. At the bottom of our case study, we are linked to 8 articles in major outlets by Jason Hickel, Martin Kirk, and Alnor Lada. This first one sounds interesting. Let's check it out. Don't be scared about the end of capitalism. Be excited to build what comes next. By Jason Hickel and Martin Kirk. These are fast-changing times. Old certainties are collapsing around us, and people are scrambling for new ways of being in the world.
Ecosystems are collapsing.
The authors are quick to condemn communist economic experiments, calling Soviet Russia an unmitigated social and economic disaster, while being less critical towards social democracies, such as Sweden and Finland, for example, or even post-war Britain and the New Deal in the US. Even the best of them don't offer the solutions we so urgently need right now. In an era of climate change and ecological collapse, right now we are overshooting Earth's carrying capacity. They go on to say that, in fact, no economic system has been proven good enough to solve the real problem. The socialism that exists in the world today, on its own, has nothing much to say about this. Just like capitalism, it relies on endless, indeed exponential GDP growth, ever-increasing levels levels of extraction and production and consumption. The two systems may disagree about how to best distribute the yields of a plundered earth, but they do not question the process of plunder itself. Good news, our authors offer us ideas out there that stretch well beyond these dusty old binaries, driven by organizations like the Institute for New Economic Thinking, and proposed models like Degrowth. There are even communities of practice from the Global Transition Network and serious economists and writers such as David Fleming, making a spirited case that the evolution beyond capitalism is well underway and unstoppable. The authors go on to concede that not all would necessarily describe themselves as anti or even post-capitalist, but they are all, in one way or another, breaking through the dry seals of neoclassical economic theory upon which capitalism rests. Because, as they frame it, the real problem is capitalism's endless need for resources already driving us over the cliff edge of climate change and ecological collapse. The real issue isn't the rulers who drive the economic ship of capitalism. It's the 4.3 billion people living successful, hyper-consumptive lifestyles and using up our planet's finite resources. When information is served up to you in media outlets, it can be hard to decipher what the intention is, what narrative the author is trying to incept in the audience. Luckily though, our co-author Martin Kirk brags about this on the Rules website. We set out to hack the growth narrative. We were also familiar with and part of the emerging degrowth movement. The issue we had was that the movement was largely academics who tended to downplay the storytelling aspects of creating viable alternatives, rather than negotiating with a coalition of heterodox economists, policymakers, and others. We decided to create a practical example of post-growth logic in motion that could be adopted by those who were interested. Our narrative intention was to question and disrupt the logic of growth as inherently good. In order to do this, we decided to pit growth against something that is inherently better in order to create cognitive dissonance for an idea that is rarely open to reconsideration. From this, the organizing principle of #GrowthOrLife was born.
And we always said that the reason to study narrative is because all power rests on the ability to control language. And if you can't control language, if you don't understand language, you've got your hands tied behind your back. And the second one is that humans always make sense of their world through stories. And so to understand the stories and understand what the stories grow from, to understand the logic that the stories are constructed upon, is an essential tool towards being a positive force in the world.
The Rules closed in 2019, and its members now run a consultancy called Culture Hack Labs. Martin Kirk, like a modern-day Edward Bernays, uses stories and narratives to promote his agenda. But who influenced the influencer?
David's work has taken me somewhere that I hadn't got on my own. With 20 years of thinking about these issues and climate change and poverty, he took me over a threshold, and the very important threshold that I think the world collectively is struggling with right now, which is the desperate desire to hold on to what is. And it triggers very big fear responses. What does it mean for the collapse, system collapse, civilization collapse?
Who is David Fleming? Some kind of end-of-the-world merchant?
For me, he wasn't so much an end-of-the-world merchant as a what will the next world look like merchant. He was the least doomy, pessimistic person.
The end is in sight. During the early decades of the century, the market will lose its magic. As the market's taut competitiveness demands ever-increasing productivity and thus relies on the impossibility of perpetual growth.
For David, the world we see around us now, it's a system which is destroying the biosphere, the climate, is causing an unprecedented eradication of biodiversity and life on this planet. It's something which is creating an epidemic of loneliness, of isolation, a mental health crisis.
And yet we still want to believe in the demonstrably impossible myth of endless economic growth, hoping that it can defer the climacteric forever. Such connection with life was a central concept for David Fleming, and not just human life. His holistic ecological thinking recognised that a purely human-centric viewpoint not only damages the ecosystems that support all life, but diminishes us as people. And his writing recognised the times to step beyond logic into the poetic, the spiritual. This kind of lean economy, as David Fleming described it, has also been called the economics of happiness.
The claim that centralized industrial agriculture is the only way of feeding a large population is about as scientific as a belief in creationism, and far more damaging. The transition movement says, if communities are to be prepared for the coming shocks of climate, economics, energy, and society, it will not be government that will do it. It will be something that they do for themselves. And trust is a key enabling condition for this transformation.
Transition Town is a movement of communities around the world who are reimagining and rebuilding the world. Ultimately, where it is heading in the places that are most sort of advanced with it now is they become a kind of a driver for economic regeneration, but through this lens of resilience and localization. So they become, communities becoming their own housing providers, their own energy companies, their own food businesses.
And that alternative to growth for David is culture, is the informal economy, which is built in trust and relationships. If we can get away from our dependence on the monetary economy and remember how to rely on each other again.
The informal economy consists of all the things we do for each other which do not involve money. It's the fusion of friendship and service, of presence and local self-reliance. And throughout history, it has proven its ability to maintain the stability of an economy without growth.
We are politically, socially, and economically addicted to unending growth through the design of our institutions.
She takes the same starting point as David Fleming, that the goal of ever-increasing economic growth, so dear to politicians and mainstream economists, is just not possible on a finite planet.
People sometimes say, well, growth is a wonderful thing. We all want growth. I want to see my children grow. I like to see my garden grow. But if I said to you, I have a growth, well, that's very different, because you'd know that if I, a complex living system, had something in me that was attempting to grow indefinitely, well, that would be a cancer.
Kate Raworth is not the only person to compare growth to a cancer. Environmental anarchist Edward Abbey is famously quoted for saying, "Growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of a cancer cell." In 1983, Abbey wrote, "According to the morning paper, the population of America will reach 267 million by 2000 AD, an increase of 40 million, or about 1/6, in only 7 years. And the racial composition of the population will also change considerably. The white birth rate is about 60 per 1,000 females, the Negro rate 83 per 1,000, and the Hispanic rate 96 per 1,000. Am I racist? I guess I am. I certainly do not wish to live in a society dominated by blacks or Mexicans or Orientals. Look at Africa, at Mexico, at Asia. America's welfare system is a failure, a subsidy for baby production. We need some severe economic and political means for promoting birth control, population stabilization, and population reduction. Zero population growth, and then negative population growth." Wow, he's really saying the quiet parts loud. Degrowth, transition town, new economy. Am I crazy? Or is this all starting to sound like the same thing?
What do mutual aid networks, worker co-ops, community land trust, participatory budgeting, and time banks have in common? Community ownership and democratic governance that builds political, cultural, and economic power. When these hyperlocal initiatives get together, they have enormous power. This emergent movement goes by many names. But internationally, it's known as the social and solidarity economy, or solidarity economy for short. The people who have been most harmed are creating community-controlled, hyper-local economies that are resilient amidst crisis. Artists are the original gig workers. Culture making and political organizing go hand in hand.
Well, that could be a powerful political voice. That could be a powerful voice for action. That could be a powerful voice for protest.
So the task is not to ask ourselves whether we want to move to a post-growth economy, but prepare for it.
Kirk has the narrative down pat. All he needs now is to find some small town to put these ideas into practice. Imagine if some rich guys started to believe all this stuff.
We will start to live in relationship again to each other, to the land, to every other species on the planet. We have everything to gain, and I think that speaks to the difference between what we've been sold in terms of how we'll be happy, which is through material gain, versus what is true, which is how we will feel fulfilled and purposeful through relational gain in every sense of the word.
Oh, fuck.
And this community that I'm starting to become embedded in, I've been here for a year in a little city in Kingston, upstate New York, and I'm learning how to belong. And it's a journey. It's not always easy, but I'm fixed on this now. I know that I have to become of this place and of these people.
I believe this country has been on a collision course with collapse for 500 years. Some native people call it Wetiko. America's foundation is finally being seen for what it was built on. Plenty of people have seen it and felt it for centuries. What the hell is Wetiko? From a 2016 article in Cosmos Journal, written by the Rules co-founders Martin Kirk and Elnor Latta, called Seeing Wetiko, on capitalism, mind viruses, and antidotes for a world in transition. We would presumably all agree that the behavior of the European colonialists in North America can be described as cannibalistic. Their drive for conquest and material accumulation was a violent act of consumption. The point is that the epidemiology of Wetiko has left clear indicators of its lineage, and although it cannot be pathologized along geographic or racial lines, the cultural strain we know today certainly has many of its deepest roots in Europe. Okay, so it came from the whiteys, but what the hell is it? An unnatural desire for more, the nature of modern capitalism. Its insatiable hunger for finite resources, its belief in consumption as savior, its overriding obsession with its own material growth, and its viral spread. We are phenomenal hosts of the Wetiko mind virus. Any system that is sufficiently infected by Wetiko logic will reward cannibalistic behavior. Those who squirm upwards in a Wetiko system are or become Wetiko, and they only perpetuate the system of corruption or oppression. Thus, the communist leaders of the Soviet Union under Stalin were at least as vicious, deceitful, and exploitative as their czarist predecessors. They obtained power without changing their Wetiko culture. For those of us on the outside, using alternative currencies undermines the debt-based money system. Deschooling and alternative education models can help decolonize and de-Wetikoize the mind. Helping to create alternative communities outside the capitalist system supports the infrastructure for transition, and direct activism, such as debt resistance, can weaken the Wetiko virus, if done with the right intention and state of consciousness.
You know, it's that consciousness shift.
We have the opportunity to change the consciousness.
Wetiko is a fascinating concept. The idea is that it's a word for what they would call a cannibalistic spirit, that we might in our modern terminology call a thought form or a meme. But essentially it's a thought complex, a thought logic that drives greed, excess, and selfish consumption. So immediately I'm sure you can see how you could describe modern capitalism as in many ways a Wetiko system, or a system infected by Wetiko logic, the constant need for growth. So what we've done is we've launched a campaign called Seeing Wetiko. And the idea is that we want to get people to reflect and to see Wetiko both in themselves, because this is a thought form that is endemic in modern culture. And everybody that lives in modern culture is in some way or other infected by it. It requires more than just your rational brain to think about it. You've got to reflect on it and lean and feel your way into it. So it didn't lend itself to the traditional sort of campaigning models where you sign a petition or support this policy initiative. It's much more about self-reflection and shifting consciousness. What we did is we commissioned and we worked with artists, and the reason that the creative work works so well is because you have to spark your imagination. You have to get into your non-rational mental space in order to really reflect and see the power of this idea. Jack Forbes used to use the word in two ways. One was to describe the infection itself, and the other, if the infection is very far advanced, you can say that somebody is a Wetiko.
Cree Native Americans named Wetiko as a cannibalistic entity taking over the mind in an insatiable and lethal embrace. Wetiko is characterized as a psychic starvation that leads to an insatiable hunger. Now, we pretend our individualistic consumerism is a sign of our strength. Wetiko has spread like a silent disease. Conscious awareness is sunlight to the hidden corners of Wetiko.
Wetiko is Buffett's religion. David Fleming wrote his Bible. But Buffett has other influences, including late neo-Malthusian Daniel Quinn, who wrote a cult book called Ishmael about a telepathic gorilla who teaches his students how the advent of agriculture led to overpopulation. The fingerprints of Wetiko can be traced to when humans in the Fertile Crescent first learned to dominate their environment by what author Daniel Quinn calls totalitarian agriculture, i.e. settled agricultural practices that produce more food than is strictly needed for the population, and that sees the destruction of any living entity that gets in the way of that overproduction, be it other humans, pests, or the natural environment, as not only legitimate, but moral.
This is What's Next. I'm Peter Buffett, and we're talking with Daniel Quinn.
The UN says that their median guess is that by the end of the century, there'll be 10 billion of us. And so, well, that's okay. That's only 3 more billion. That's 40% more than we are right now. This is incredible. I don't believe we'll make it. I think that we will be gone before we get to 10 billion. I think that the whole system will collapse before we get there. And it will if we keep on doing what we are doing now.
Yeah, absolutely.
On his website, Peter writes, it's estimated that 2.5 billion people live on less than $2 a day. Instead of thinking, oh my god, that's terrible, which is a totally rational thing to think, what if instead we thought, how can the rest of us get to that point? We have to turn this system inside out. Start with the heart, not the bank account. Start with power with, not power over. Start with feeling, not logic. Start with remembering that each one of us is a perfect metaphor for all of us, made up of individual cells, all knowing their purpose, and carrying it out by being perfectly themselves. The problems start when the cells forget their purpose and start to grow and divide uncontrollably, as if there is no end to their hunger for growth and destruction. The expected growth we see in government and economic sectors is impossible to sustain, cancer-like. Anyone who believes in indefinite growth in anything physical on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
I am Peter Buffett, and we are at the Hudson Valley Farm Hub, but specifically in Kingston because we're in such deep relationship with so many partners.
Since 2013, Peter Buffett has been concentrating his efforts on pumping millions of dollars into a small, rural city of 22,000 in upstate New York. By and large, the citizens of this community have little to no clue that the son of a global capitalist billionaire is orchestrating a new economy, degrowth, small is beautiful experiment.
First of all, I'll say that I have a few phrases for the foundation that aren't publicly announced anywhere. We're trying to practice 21st century alchemy. We're trying to turn money into love. You know, here we have a couple of interesting ingredients. The foundation bought a 1,500-acre farm, a very wonderful, fertile farm, right near a 23,000 population community, Kingston. And we had aligned city government, we had aligned, still do, county government, and a lot of young activists in the area.
You don't need everybody, you need a concerned activist group.
And so the first two the interventions to some extent, or you know, creations of conditions, the farm absolutely first. The second big intervention was a radio station. It's not a radio station, it's something else. It's about these other ways it can put its tentacles into the community. I was able to purchase that for a surprisingly small amount of money, given the asset that it promised to be. Surprisingly robust and fast transformational element that I really didn't see coming. The farm and the radio station, I could name a whole bunch of other ones, but those are big infrastructure pieces.
Well, what is happening in Kingston?
Home prices are shattering records, especially in smaller cities.
Cities like Kingston, New York are up 35%, Boise up 33%, and Las Vegas up 15%.
Radio Kingston. Many voices. Muchas voces.
Many voices.
One community.
Come and hear a story.
Humans always make sense of their world through stories.
Every Sunday afternoon. Gather round the radio.
Is there any? How is the conversation landing with you, Erica? The idea, the localization idea, is this, and particularly from your perch, looking over the community from Radio Kingston. Do you think this is something that would resonate widely in the community, or is this something that you think smaller groups of people need to be deeply informed about, but everybody else doesn't need to be? How does that idea strike you?
You don't need everybody. You need a concerned activist group.
Kick us off with what you understand to be happening in Kingston over the last couple of years.
Clearly, with your presence here, other members of Novo, the Goodwill Institute, there's been a number of people who've moved into Kingston of late who are really thinking along these lines, and that's been quite invigorating. Of course, the radio station there is the center of this kind of thinking and discussion. We've got the farm hub out in the valley here. So I see us as being, in a sense, two parallel towns this way, with a lot of people really thinking along these lines, aware of the local food movement and supportive of it, but a lot of other folks enmeshed in those very kinds of large-scale distribution systems that bring food in here from, the other side of the planet.
Has done for her, but we're going to talk about a little bit about that. We're going to talk about what the Good Work Institute does and what they are bringing to Kingston, trying to create a space where change makers, nonprofits, creative folks can do good work in the world and then do something beneficial with their profits.
Okay.
Something a little different maybe.
Oh, fuck, not this guy too.
The greenhouse, which Michael will talk a little bit more about, is a physical space here in Kingston. It's on the corner of St. James and Clinton. It's the old Girl Scout headquarters. And that's really being developed as a space to support a movement, to support a revolution.
Next thing you're going to tell me is that he believes indigenous people are magical earth protectors with a special message from Mother Earth who's saying, no, don't kill me.
The Tayuna, who are the the last four indigenous families of Colombia, but basically they see themselves as the earth protectors. They live in isolation. They still live in the way they lived 4,000 years ago. But they're in direct communication with the Earth Mother who lives in the water. And she told them that they have to come here to warn us that we're killing her.
This was for the potatoes.
That's all you get to hear is music that you get in elevators and shopping centers, and all you get to eat are potatoes.
On April 20th of this year, Peter Buffett, We, shared a blog post written by Ian Welsh originally in 2017, but then reposted this April, titled Capitalism and Good Post-Capitalism. Feudalism was no joy, but capitalism removed even more economic freedom than feudalism did. You don't have to believe me. Believe the people who lived at the time, who violently resisted the changes. They weren't idiots. They weren't fools. They knew their lives were being changed for the worse. That it worked out for some of their descendants means little. A century of technological improvements accounts for much of that. Post-capitalism, if it is any good, will restore the ability to grow and make what they need to the people. Not like feudalism, but a craft-based, hunter-gatherer society. Work 20 hours a week to meet the essentials. Spend the rest of the time as you wish, and choose how and when to work those 20 hours. Environmentalism has led to the revival of the notion of poverty as a virtue. In the Middle Ages, poverty was regarded as the inescapable condition of life for most people, while monks adopted voluntary poverty as beneficial to spiritual growth. Today, poverty sometimes appears to be considered good for the environment. As the contradictions of capitalist economy have begun to pile up, the New Left movement of the 60s and 70s, the one that gave rise to modern environmentalism, has returned in full force. There's little veneer left to hide the fact that the original capitalist experiment has now fully run its course. Now anti-capitalism isn't just socially acceptable, it's quickly becoming the dominant ideology of the capitalist elites themselves. And that's because we're transitioning to a new economy, a mutual aid, neo-feudalist economy. In the medieval worldview, society was held together by bonds of mutual obligation. At the top, there were bonds within the clergy and the nobility, and bonds between the two, in a kind of mutual aid society. Left-wing thought leaders don't call for redistribution at the top. Instead, they leverage Silicon Valley dominance to force the lower classes to continuously divide their already trivial-sized slice of the pie. The middle class will likely foot much of the bill for guaranteed wages, healthcare, free college, and housing assistance, along with subsidies for gig workers who do not receive benefits from their employers. This model could best be described as oligarchical socialism. The redistribution of resources would meet the material needs of the working class and the declining middle class, but it would not promote upward mobility or threaten the dominance of the oligarchs. This represents a sea change from the old industrial economy. Rather than acquiring property and gaining a modicum of self-sufficiency, workers can now expect a serf-like future of rented apartments and frozen prospects. Unable to grow into property-owning adults, they will depend on subsidies to meet their basic needs. The upper classes of society see themselves as inherently better. But with this haughtiness also comes a deep fear of humanity. Manipulation of the masses is imperative in order to get their desired outcome. This is why they establish workaround methods like sortition, which creates a mirage of democracy without genuine public consent. The new tech aristocracy also regard themselves as intrinsically more deserving of their wealth and power than the old managerial elites or the grubby corporate speculators. They believe they are not just creating value, but building a better world. Manipulation of the masses creates paranoia, which leads to Malthusian machinations. The longer the deception goes on, the more separate the rhetoric becomes from reality. The type of cognitive dissonance we witness today among liberal elites is another echo of feudal times. In the face of these social challenges, the intellectual classes in the higher income countries, in the universities, the media, and the arts, almost universally seek to deconstruct the values that guided their country's ascent and provided the foundation for widespread prosperity. Instead of concerning themselves with addressing the consequences of economic stagnation, more poverty, social immobility, class conflict, many in the clerisy, and even the oligarchy promote the idea of sustainability over broad-based economic growth. Just as the medieval clergy preached against materialism, leading figures in today's academia and media, and even some among the corporate elite, look askance at the very idea of a dynamic economy, a spirit of innovation, and a commitment to improving everyday life. In this way, the clerisy reinforced the pessimistic notion that upward mobility is a relic of the past, and that our primary tasks now are to redress social grievances and protect the environment, rather than seek ways to spread wealth and opportunity. The new feudalism won't feature intrepid knights in armor or fortified castles, or raise soaring cathedrals filled with liturgical chants. Instead, it will boast dazzling new technology and be wrapped in a creed of globalism and environmental piety. As the parson has ever gone hand in hand with the landlord, so has clerical socialism with feudal socialism. Nothing is easier than to give Christian asceticism a socialist tinge. Has not Christianity declaimed against private property, against marriage, against the state? Has it not preached in the place of these charity and poverty, celibacy and mortification of the flesh, monastic life and mother church? Christian socialism is but the holy water with which the priest consecrates the heartburnings of the aristocrat. Without economic growth and the opportunity for people to rise up the class ladder, we will devolve towards a class structure more favorable to aristocracy and authoritarian rule. Rather than seek to restore the class structure of the Middle Ages, we should again embrace growth and look to innovation rather than punitive measures to address climate change and other environmental issues. Economic growth should not be seen as a hindrance to a better world, but our best chance for greater social cohesion, upward mobility, and a commitment to an improved environment. Growth is an ideal we can lose, but only at our own peril. Whoa, heavy stuff. I didn't realize this was going to be doomer content. He believes indigenous... Next thing you're going to tell me is that he believes indigenous... fucking air quotes. Do 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 boo boo choo boo. Okay, that's enough.